All right, let's explore this a little bit further, and in particular, the legal implications of what could happen here. And we're joined in studio by legal expert Kevin Smith. Mr. Smith, good evening to you.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you very much for your time. Let's just begin with whether there are any major differences between a coalition structure of a government and a government of national unity structure.
The structure in its form doesn't have much difference because it is a combination of parties acting together for the betterment and for the assistance of running the country.
Yeah.
The difference with a coalition would be that there would be a set number of parties, one or two or more of those who have been predetermined on certain criteria, whereas a government of national unity could take a completely different structure, whereas you could have all parties concerned being involved, or as in the case of 1994, parties with a voter threshold of 10%. Either way, it would still be a collaborative effort. It's just the criteria that changes from one structure to the next.
Let's assume, therefore, that either of these structures come into place. How does a power-sharing agreement, or how do power-sharing agreements help foster a democracy or enable it?
Well, the key word there is an agreement, meaning that the parties at play, whoever would be participating, would need some form of consensus as to what role each and every one of those parties would be playing. So a well-drafted agreement of that nature would make sure that it has lines of hierarchy, it makes sure that it has certain structures of power that are predetermined to ensure that decision-making, first and foremost, can go through smoothly. So as far as that is concerned, it's a matter of engagement between the parties, and it's a matter of ensuring that those lines of communication, those lines of engagement, and the hierarchy of power is well set out.
An implication here may come as a result of a poorly structured coalition agreement or government of national unity agreement. What would the implications of a poorly designed structure look like?
Well, the most glaring issue would be that decision-making would come to a standstill. It is something we have seen in coalition governments of the past at local and provincial level, and we have seen it with Action SA having to leave their partners in recent history. So what can end up happening is that the citizens are prejudiced in that proper decision-making can't go through, or that budgets can't be passed, or the normal running of governmental business isn't running smoothly on the basis that there are parties at loggerheads, or that there are principal concessions that need to be made, or at the worst that the government is held ransom internally. And those are the things that we have to make sure that the agreement itself can cater for, so that you don't have situations where they have to approach the courts at any given problem that is had between the parties, which is something that we are starting to see now. But with all well-drafted agreements, whether they are political, commercial, or otherwise, the agreement itself should have a mechanism to solve those issues of deadlock, to solve those issues of disagreement, so that everything can run smoothly regardless of consensus being made.
You see, now you're leading us to a very interesting question, because the question arises as to whether or not we need laws for power-sharing agreements. Do you think that is necessary?
I wouldn't say the laws in respect of power sharing would be necessary, because then that sets the criteria for power sharing itself. Because remember then, if the parties do not agree to that power sharing structure, then they would be in breach of the law, which gives us a separate problem. But I think there should be some form of overarching legislation to make sure that in those situations there's either a caretaker government in place or a caretaker structure in place to ensure that the running of the country still goes smoothly and is of paramount importance. Yeah. But us setting legislation specifically for power sharing would mean that we are constricted to follow that specific procedure and that specific legislation. And to the extent that that may not be the most effective for the government of the day, would mean that the government can't perform as efficiently as they should.
Yeah. One thing that has not changed, despite all of what we are seeing now, especially within the realm of political parties, one thing that's remained constant is the Constitution and the procedures that ought to be taken. And the first real test of that we're going to see this coming Friday, that first parliamentary sitting, which is going to take place within 40 days of that June the 2nd declaration of election results. Does the law say specifically how much time the president has when he is formally elected by parliament? How much time he has to elect or appoint his cabinet?
Well, that is determined after the first sitting. So once the first sitting takes place, which will happen on the 14th, those elections then take place internally. And then from there it becomes a decision that he then needs to make. And within the next 90 days, we will have his cabinet appointed. So all of those things are actually determined constitutionally. And as we have seen with the recent engagement between the MK and Parliament, that is what they are making clear, is that they are following the Constitution to the letter. And to the extent that a court finds that the running of the first sitting or any other business held by the National Assembly is actually invalid and invalidated, then they will move according to that court order. But as it stands, everything is running smoothly as it should.
Once the president is elected on Friday, what happens to the existing cabinet? Because as things stand, we have a president and we have a cabinet, albeit an outgoing cabinet. Well,
firstly, it is a matter of the entire government having decided on what cabinet structure they would have. There have been talks of having a reduced cabinet following this existing cabinet, or a cabinet of the same size. And that, of course, will come down to either the coalition agreements or the GNU being formally effected. So what will happen is once everything is announced and the cabinet structure has been confirmed with those members of cabinet, it would be a smooth transition from the current cabinet to the next. And that should be happening over the next 90 days as from the first sitting of Parliament, which is happening on the 14th.
All right. Thank you very much for that clarity. Kevin Smith, a legal expert, thank you indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me.